Hi, and welcome to Managing Your Mental Health During COVID-19. I'm Susan Armstrong, and I'm pleased to bring you an interview series of short 30-minute interviews with global experts to help you manage this self-isolation and lockdown and your mental health during this period. And I always think that our mental health is of the utmost importance, since our mental health actually does affect our physical health, our financial health, the health of our relationships, and our family in general. So I hope you enjoyed the series. I'd be happy for you to send me email or leave comments and let me know if there are any other topics that you're interested in that we don't cover during this series. I hope you enjoy it. So welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to have you here at our inaugural show for managing your mental health during COVID-19. And, you know, when I was thinking about doing this series of interviews, I was thinking about content and where are we struggling right now? And I think we're all struggling, myself included. And one of the first things that came to my mind was happiness. You know, how are people managing? So are they happy? Are they miserable? Are we struggling with this? And I know that I always think that happiness is a choice and that we choose to be happy or not happy. So when I was thinking about this, I thought it might be a great first show and a great first interview. And there was absolutely only one name that came to my mind when I thought about doing this show. And that was Kyla Mitsunaga. And she's coming to us from South Korea. But Kyla is a pretty accomplished woman in and of herself. So graduated from Harvard, and I think had a very prestigious teaching award in graduating from Harvard, and was a professor for, I believe, 7 years, Kyla? Yeah. Travels around the world, much like I do, working with large, well-known global organizations and coaching senior leaders. She does online programs and workshops, and I'm so happy to have Kyla with me here today, because this is someone that when I think of happiness, she doesn't just talk about it and teach it, but she actually lives it. I think she's the happiest woman I know. So we met a few years ago in Oslo. And like I said, when I think of happiness, I think of Kyla. So thanks so much for giving up your time to be here with us today.
Thank you so much.
It's nice to have you. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Susan.
So, well, first of all, South Korea, are you suffering in South Korea like the rest of the world? You have lockdown there as well?
Yeah, I came from New Jersey, so I lived here for 9 years, went to Jersey for a little under a year for my husband's job, and then he works for a Korean company. His team was pulled back out of Jersey because of COVID. I think that the Korean government's handling it really well. We had to download an app. We have to check our temperature twice a day, input into the app. We have a health worker that checks in with us daily. We had hygiene kits sent over. We were both tested for COVID within 3 days of arriving. We both tested negative. We're feel really taken care of here.
Oh, that's amazing. But you are in self-isolation, right? After just traveling? Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
So you're struggling like the rest of us then, looking at the same walls every day. So tell us a little bit about happiness. I think, I've always had a definition, Kyla, and I'm not sure if it serves me well or it gets in my way, but I've always had a definition of happiness, that happiness is wanting what you have. And so while I think that's a good thing, that it stops me from doing, I think, the very human thing of saying, okay, well, I'll be happy when this happens, or, I'll be happy when this next big thing happens. It stops me from doing that. But I often wonder if it doesn't also stop me from, striving for those other things. So I'm not sure if it's a good definition or a bad definition. So what's your definition of happiness?
Yeah, I really like that definition. I mean, and I think it works for you. You're a very happy person,
Yeah.
And you've done a lot of work on yourself with yourself, which I deeply respect as well. I know we've had conversations around this.
We have.
So, I think for me, what I've come to realize over the years is a couple things. I think I have a couple definitions of happiness. The first one is that happiness is not the absence of negative emotions, it's the acceptance of them. And the second one is there's no happiness without healing. So I think that your definition of happiness changes as you evolve and you change and as you go through life. You know, and we talked about before the show how change is the only constant.
Yes.
And, you know, because Susan was talking about how she's on the go so much and her life is constantly changing, and now it's suddenly not. Whereas for probably the majority of people, their lives are pretty much the same, you know, day in and day out. And people rely on that predictability. So,
Right.
so here we are in the great unknown, and we're living with a couple of illusions. So fear is an illusion, control is an illusion.
Yes, it is.
You know, and so we're living with a lot of these illusions, that we think we can control things, we think we can, or we have to live in fear, but actually we don't have to, and really it's just a mindset shift to, like, you know, Susan was talking about earlier, like hitting the great pause button. And
yeah,
what is this showing us? To me, I think to the second definition of happiness about healing, you know, what is it that is being called to heal on a micro level for us humans, and on a macro level for our planet? I mean, I'm sure you've read the news, right? Like, you can see the Himalayas in India for the first time in 30 years.
Yeah. And you know, it's a good point. And I like when you said it was acceptance of negative emotions as well, because I always think, you know, anything is neutral, right? Any situation, COVID-19 is just neutral. It's not bad or good. And depending on how you view that, it becomes bad or good. And if you care about climate change and the ozone layer, this is a really good thing, because there's no planes flying and no cars, and the planet can breathe. Yeah. So when you say about acceptance of the negative emotions, I think that you bring up a really good point. So happiness does it? I don't think so. It doesn't mean that you're happy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, constantly. Right? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a misunderstanding / assumption of it. And what people use to kind of keep happiness into what you were saying earlier, going back to what you were saying earlier of the, I'll be happy when.
Right.
You know, like, well, you know, I don't have this and I don't have this, and I can't be happy all the time, so I'll just be happy when, you know, XYZ, right? But the truth is, we're also human. And we humans have roughly 60,000 thoughts per day, and 80% of them are negative.
No.
And 95% of those thoughts are on repeat. So you know that negative loop.
Oh, hey, do I know the negative? I've spent years trying to rewire that loop. I'm very familiar.
Yeah. Elbow.
Yeah. Oh,
elbow.
touch the elbow. Okay. Elbow bump. All right. Yes. Okay. Wow.
That's our starting point as humans. So get it, like, and it's because, you know, we're primed for flight or fight, as you know, like our hunter-gatherer brain. And so it's interesting, right? Because people are like, well, you know, I don't like people who are positive, or like there's this kind of, again, at bay, right, with, you know, sunny Sally or positive Polly. But there's actually real science behind, you know, positive psychology. So something that I was thinking about when you asked me about the show and like happiness and this reframe, right? I mean, so much of it is reframing, right? Whether it's negative to positive, or lack to abundance, or fear to love, or, whatever it is. I think now more than ever, it's important to reframe things. And something that I thought about are like the 3 Ps. Have you heard of the 3 Ps in positive psychology?
I don't think I have.
There's so many P's in that sentence. There's 5
There are.
P's.
There's a lot of P's in there.
So
you see, I told you, she's the happiest person ever.
But not happy all the time, and it takes work, right? As we've both, it's a lot of growth work, and we're all a work in progress. And this is why we need Susan in the show, and this is why it's such a great idea. But so back to the 3 Ps.
Yeah.
So the first P is personalization. So what we do when we're in a negative spiral, or any, like I call it corona apocalypse or any apocalypse, we think that we're the only ones going through it, right? For me, it was depression. There's millions of people, not that I'm like wanting people to be depressed, but I remember being depressed and thinking, gosh, it's just me.
Yeah.
That feeling.
I do. Been there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then you isolate more and more, and you withdraw more and more, right? But really, gosh, we're all in it together. We're all going through something. We've all got something. We've all got baggage. Most of us just don't talk about it. So that's why this show is so important for us to share and talk about it. And going back to something Susan said earlier, it's like Susan's happiness, right? Her sharing, this is her happiness. And that's also proven in science, right? Like when you give back to others, you feel that happiness, really. So the first P is personalization. And then the second P is permanence. So we're in this frame of mind where it's like, oh, it's going to be like this forever.
See, that's what worries me in this particular situation, right? That's what worries me. And I'll be honest that I can't listen to the news. I can't read the headlines, because when I start seeing, this isn't going to be over for 18 months to 2 years, and, social isolation is going to last till August. I mean, Kyla, I've got a wicked imagination. My mind can go down that rabbit hole. And so I guess that's what it is. It's, I can in a fraction of a second, take a headline, and we know the news presents it as if it's fact, right? And I can take that headline, and pretty soon I'm down that rabbit hole, and that's so dangerous for me. I have to be very careful. But I think that's what it is I read those headlines, and it's permanence, I think, forever. And I have to really watch myself with that.
Yeah. And I love that, thank you for sharing. I'm the same. I can't watch the news. But I love Dr. Fauci, because I find him, don't you love him? I find him to be very honest, right? Like, we don't know. Yeah. Like, we don't know. And I'm not going to say we know, I'm not going to speak out of something just to make you feel better, or, say things that you want to hear. But what you're sharing, Susan, it's so great that you bring that up. And that's great self-awareness, because that's something called catastrophizing, right? When we worst case scenario things. And that's also a human trait, right? That's a survival trait, right? The lion's coming, what are we going to do? How are we going to get our food? How are we going to survive? That kind of like hunter-gatherer brain. Yeah. So again, go back to the personalization. I'm not alone. This is not going to be permanent. The second P, even if it is 18 months, that's not your entire life. And even then, at some point, we're going to get a vaccine.
Yeah.
So there may be some things that need to shift with our lives. And I think for the better, quite frankly. I mean, the planet is like, thank you for not polluting me.
That's what I've been saying. Mother Nature can breathe.
Yeah. And just like new ways of, being with family. What does that look like? How do we find meaning in this,
Mm.
And then the third P, it kind of relates to all of this, is pervasiveness. So we also assume that in all of this, it just has to cast a shadow and on every other aspect of our lives. Like I remember when I was going through my depression, I was like, well, since I'm depressed, I can't do anything else. And then it's kind of like a little bit of a self-sabotage, because then you're like, okay, well, I'll just stay in bed.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that makes sense, kind of, but not really.
Not really, no.
But so yeah, I think, yeah, it's a reckoning for sure. We're at a time in our lives of like a huge reckoning. But also, I don't know if you're familiar with Brene Brown's work.
Of course. Yes.
I love her. So she has this podcast called Unlocking Us.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, there's one episode on grief where she interviews David Kessler, who's like the grief guru.
Yeah.
And he worked with the woman who came up with, the 5 stages of grief.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Yeah.
Yes,
mm-hmm.
Exactly. So what I love about that interview is they reframe this corona apocalypse in grief. And I had never thought about it, because
okay, this is interesting. I'm interested. Yeah. Okay.
Because we are grieving traveling,
yeah,
being able to leave, social contact, touch,
yes,
normal routine, not wearing a mask when leaving the house. I mean, we're grieving so many things, right? And we're at different stages of the grieving process, right? Like we're all grieving at different times, at different points, at different levels, at different, and just so for everybody at home, just to recap, like what the 5 steps are. So it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But I love the 6th one that David Kessler added, which is finding meaning.
Okay.
And that's where we are, right? Your meaning is like, what can I do to help people? Yeah. I've always wanted to do a show. Yep. I know these people. I'm going to call them in, and then I'm going to share that.
Yep.
That's your meaning in all this. If this had not happened, this show may or may not have happened.
No, you're right, Kyla. It probably wouldn't, because I'm so busy traveling. I'm so busy with change. I'm so busy with, different countries and people. No, it wouldn't. It is the fact that I'm in one place and, I'm working in a different way that I have had time to think about how to do this. I like that, meaning, finding meaning. It's interesting. Now that you put words to that, that is actually the process that I went through after my father died. At the end of that, when I came to acceptance, I actually found meaning in the death of my father. So yeah, I think I agree that it just takes, I think it takes the self-awareness and a little bit of work to get there.
Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing about your father and your grieving. And I always thought that, I guess, like, my understanding of grief was that it had to do about death.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like someone else's death, right?
Yeah.
Like your father's death, or like my grandmother's death, or, right. But this has totally reshifted things for me, because I'm like, oh, wait, there's the death in social contact, right? Yeah. There's the death in travel. There's the death in, so ways of doing business. There's so many things that are changing, but, what spring has shown us, right, is that, it's kind of like we're going through the winter when things are like dying, leaves are falling, and here in Korea, like the cherry blossoms are blooming, and
Oh,
it's just
it must be
gorgeous.
beautiful. Yeah.
I peek out like from my window and I'm like, hi, cherry blossoms. I'll be there soon. Stay on the tree. Stay on the tree.
Yeah. You wish, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish we could just have spring here in Toronto. Spring would be good. It's snowing out there right now. So, yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, just
That's
to add
so
insult to
cool.
injury, No, it's not cool. It's only cool if you haven't seen snow in a while.
That's true. We didn't get snow in Jersey. We didn't get snow in Jersey this year.
No, it's pretty mild winter. So, what's funny, what just struck me, and maybe, I don't know, I think we might have to talk about this for 5 minutes. Otherwise, people are going to be very confused. So we're talking about happiness. Yeah. I've already said you are the happiest person I know. And when I said I wanted to do this on happiness, you're the first name that came to mind. And yet we're both talking about depression. So I don't mean to laugh about that, but it seems like it's a bit funny. We're talking about happiness and how it's a choice and it's about reframing. And yet at the same time, we're both talking about the fact that we've suffered depression. So I don't know. I think we should talk about this. So how do these two relate? Any thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's so timely because one of my things I love how our lives are so different, but there's so much overlap. I think with anybody around the world, right? Because we're all human and we all see connection, and we all want to protect our families. We all want to be safe, right? But I've always wanted to do a show as well, and by shows taken various forms, like it started with a Facebook Live, and then it's always better to have someone else, right? Because there's different expertise. And so I was interviewed for another show actually on depression, and I met this woman named Toya, and one of the questions we were asked was, if you could do it again, would you go through depression again?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, and we both said yes. Now this is going to tie into your question. And we talked about the various reasons why. And it's almost like, you and I talked about this before the show, but life presents you with these opportunities. And every opportunity is a time for you to either avoid it, survive it, or grow. And if you don't learn and grow from the first time it happens, it's gonna come back. And Corona's just this magnifying glass on what has not been looked at and not been grown. And so my friend Toya and I we have a show, the Kyla and Toya show, where we talk about depression in an undepressing way. And I think,
that's great.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think like what you're doing,
so
right?
needed. Yeah, but it's so needed, because I think a lot of people who are going through depression, first of all, I didn't even realize I was until after I came out of it. And then I was like, oh, I should have known. And then even when you're like embarrassed to talk about it, like it's only you, right? What you were talking about before. So I think the fact that you've got a show about it is great and enormous help to people.
Yeah, thank you. And so back to your question about how talking about depression and happiness, and again, when you go back into that definition of happiness, right? And you're like, well, what is it that I have now, right? Your definition is like the gratitude. Yeah. So negative emotions like fear and depression, they don't like gratitude. They don't like the positive psychology. They don't like those kinds of things. They don't like movement. They don't like, action. They don't like sharing and talking about things that we suppress, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's rather not the topic, but how we deliver it. I mean, you're a communications expert. You coach and teach people around the world how to communicate better. This is about how do we communicate in a way that's not doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be doom and gloom. We don't have to label it doom and gloom. There's no reason for it, So, I'm grateful to be here with you and to be able to share, what we've been through together and to hopefully change someone's life.
I hope so too. But, you bring up an interesting thing about the gratitude. And I think that's part of it, I think every morning when I wake up, I think to myself, before I even get out of bed, I do sort of like a gratitude practice, but I think about how grateful I am, for my life, right? And everything I have in my life. And that seems to make a difference. And the other thing I found that's really important, and I've had to be very careful about this over the last 5 weeks, because like I said, it's easy for me to go down that negative rabbit hole of, this is never going to change and this is like my life forever. And, I don't even want to continue with where my brain goes on that. But I've had to watch the words that I use, the words and the phrases. So everybody, of course, as a speaker, and you are as well, and a workshop leader and a global presence, everybody's saying, oh, well, all my work has been canceled and all my work. And as I'm reading all of this and I'm talking to people and in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, same here. And then I thought, no, that's not true. I'm running around, telling myself, oh my God, all these things are canceled. No. I've had nothing canceled, but I've had everything postponed. But just that difference in that framing, right, is it's canceled. It's not anymore. No. That's not true. That's not accurate. It's not canceled. It's been postponed. So it's a different, even something as simple as that, I find makes a difference for me in maintaining my mindset and my outlook, is just watching the words that I use. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, I love that, Susan. I mean, I actually don't think it's simple. I think it's actually very profound, and that's amazing that you do that. There's this, I totally agree. There's this, in energy healing, we had to do this new life experiment. And I'm laughing only because it's so hard. It's so hard to do, but basically, it's no whining, no complaining, no negative talk, no self-criticism. I mean, and the list goes on and on and on, but it's basically what you're saying, right? It's the reframe of the language, because what happens is you're reprogramming your subconscious, right? Because that's where like habits are, that's where thoughts are, and then they become action. And so if you've been telling yourself the narrative of this has been canceled, that's been canceled, my life has been canceled, then you start finding evidence to add to that narrative, which is not true. And then like you say, your downward spiral, the downward rabbit hole persists, as opposed to abundance mindset and abundance thinking, right? Abundance begets abundance, right? Like, what is it that I can do to shift my business, to shift, yesterday I was on a panel on fear in Berlin, teleported myself to Berlin. And there was this woman who was a little bit in that mindset, right? And she talked about, well, I can't network because I can't do it physically. And so it was so interesting. We just really unpacked her fear. So, like you just worst case scenario, right? So what's the worst thing that can happen? And then you just keep asking, what's the worst thing that can happen if that happens, and so on and so forth. And what we discovered, and you could feel, like, even on a Zoom like call, you could feel the hush when we got to the bottom, because it was like, I'll be unhappy.
Right.
All the things, right? It was not about networking. Really, it wasn't about her business, her startup. It was really about the unhappiness. And so once you start unpacking all your fears, you realize that they bottom out to just one fear. For me, it's like fear of getting depressed again, because I just don't want to go back there.
Yeah, I hear you. Mm-hmm.
But realizing that since we have done that, or we have experienced that, or we have the tools, whether things have been canceled in your life, you have the tools and the resources to change that, to move forward with that, right?
Yeah,
you're more powerful than ever thought.
I agree. So I've always believed, well, not always, but, in the 30 years that I've been rewiring my brain and working on all of this stuff, I've come to believe that happiness is a choice, that we choose to be happy, we choose to be unhappy. How do you feel about that? Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I absolutely think it's a choice. I would also add on to that it takes work.
Yeah, agreed.
So belief work, limiting belief work, and growth work, and mindset work, all the things that we've talked about. And if you can find a healing modality that works for you, like working on grief like you did with your dad, or writing a book like you did, or doing the show.
And you.
Yeah, we both did.
We both did.
Yeah, Susan was such an inspiration to me, because she when we met in Oslo, after having met for like 5 minutes, she was like, yeah, you can absolutely write a book. Here's my publisher's name, and let me just connect you. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love you.
Now you have to do it.
I know. But like, just seeing someone doing something that you thought was impossible for you is so empowering. And this show that you're doing, and all your work around this with the people you're interviewing, and even other women seeing you on a stage, I think can create such a powerful shift and a powerful change. And so really, when you start shifting and creating those new neural pathways in your brain, right? You really never know whose life you're going to change and how you're going to impact that person's life. And the other thing is, fear does not like creativity. Because you're creating. It's a self-expression, and you're getting out of that fear. And for everything that you create, there's someone in the world, there's someone in the universe that needs it. They need to hear it that day. I went to Susan's workshop. I heard that one piece. She taught me how to active listen. I'm golden. I'm going to take that back to my organization. I'm going to create there. And then we are out of fear. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I think, you're right. I mean, I think you're right that happiness is a choice, but it's not an easy choice. Because I know, and I'm sure you hear this as well. I hear people all the time say, well, I can't be happy. If I had money, I'd be happy, right? If I could, go out and have a vacation, I'd be happy. Well, no, because if you're not happy, it doesn't matter if you have a vacation. It doesn't matter if you have money. You're not going to be happy then either. You kind of have to choose to be happy with what you have and who you are and where you are right now. And then those things will come to you. But you're right. It's not easy. It takes work. I think my point is that we can do it. It's a choice that we make. And if you and I can be happy, productive, and creative and go motivate the world after we've both suffered depression, then I don't know, what's everybody else's excuse? That's all we got to say, right? No, it's true though. I mean,
I love you, Susan.
But it's true. I mean, it's true. That it's up to us. It's a choice. I just really think it is. And I just admire what you do so much. So tell me about this with. I've seen that you've been doing this with warriors. Yeah. What is this?
Oh yeah. Thank you for asking. So it started out with a TED Talk. I gave a TED Talk in 2012 in Seoul, and it was based on the way that I saw communication. So with two ways instead of at one way.
Mm.
And then as I've been doing more work and more growth work and more belief work, just realizing that true happiness comes from being with yourself as opposed to at yourself, right? Where you're like self-criticism mode or taking on at balls from other people that are throwing things at you. And then once you have this baseline of being with yourself, then you can truly be with others. And, it's kind of like what you're saying, right? Like if you're not happy now, you're not going to be happy with others. You're not going to be happy doing other things. And so I've built it out, first as the TED Talk, then as a book, then as retreats, and now as a 8-week online transformative journey together. We do 1 hour a week on Zoom, and it's live. And I just take all the tools, all the tips, all the strategies that I've learned that have helped me through my depression. And I just want to shorten down people's own journey. Like if they don't have to go through 2 years of it,
Right.
like here you go, 8 weeks. I mean, not that it's like an end all fix all, but it's a constant journey and no judgment at all.
Yeah.
But that, there's a community like holding space and a place for us to go, especially now. People are seeking community more than ever, and just want to be out for that.
I know firsthand that it's not something you can do alone. You need to be with a group or have people who support you through that process. So is there a start date for that, Kyla, or can people join anytime, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's weekly. So we're accepting people weekly. All my programs are also 50% off during this time. So my one-on-one coaching, as well as this with Warrior, it's called the With Warrior Circle program. And
that's awesome. What
also
a benefit
payment
for
plans.
people.
Thank you.
That's
and also
huge
payment
gift.
plans.
Right.
Somebody texted me last night and they were like, well, I don't think I can pay the full amount right now. Like, are you open to payment plans? And I'm like, just pay whatever you can.
Right.
As long as there's good energy, right? Because that's really what money has become for us, right? Like an energy exchange.
It is energy. Yeah, it is. It is. It's just an exchange of energy. Yeah, exactly.
And you
Agreed.
want people to come in with good energy, right?
Yeah, you do. Well, I'm going to put the details for that. So I'm going to put your website and where people can get more information about that. Yeah, well, I think all the help that we can get right now, Kyla, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to spend the 30 minutes with us and talk about happiness. I really appreciate it. You're the person, like I said, I know people who write books on this, but I also know them in their personal lives. And when I think about happiness, you're the person that always comes to mind as being someone who talks about this and teaches this, but actually walks the talk. So you live this as well. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's a pleasure. And I'm going to put all the details for Kyla, how you can reach her, how you can get in touch with her and get involved in the programs if you like. They'll be at the end of this video. So thank you all for joining us. And Kyla, thanks again. Have a really great day. And wave at the cherry blossoms for me too. Yeah, I'm not seeing them for a while. So much love to you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.